Unbelievable! She actually did it!
They laughed at her boots first. Then they laughed at her plane. Then they laughed at her name. Farm pilot, they called her, loud enough for her to hear, every single morning for 6 weeks. Nobody laughed after the radio call, because in exactly 4 minutes, 3 words were going to come out of her mouth, and every F-22 pilot on that runway was going to stop breathing. This is what happened the day they found out who she really was. Before we get into it, if stories like this hit you right in the chest, hit subscribe right now because we post these every single day, and trust me, you don't want to miss the next one. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Her name was Captain Raina Voss, though nobody on Hollis Air Base bothered to learn that. To them, she was just the new transfer, a quiet woman in her late 20s who showed up on a Tuesday morning driving a rusted-out pickup truck instead of the standard-issue sedan every other officer used. She didn't wear her flight suit sharp and pressed like the others. She wore it a size too big, sleeves rolled, boots scuffed from what looked like actual farm work, because it was. Before the Air Force, before any of this, Raina grew up on 60 acres in eastern Nebraska, flying crop dusters over her family's wheat fields before she could legally drive a car. That detail leaked within the first hour, and it was all it took. Crop duster, someone muttered in the mess hall. Farm pilot, someone else said, louder, clearly wanting her to hear it. She heard it. She didn't flinch. She picked up her tray and sat down at the end of the table, alone, and ate in silence. Lieutenant Colonel Briggs, who ran flight operations at Hollis, wasn't any kinder. When her transfer papers landed on his desk, he barely looked up. "Voss, that's the crop duster girl?" he said to his adjutant. "Put her on ground sim rotation. I'm not putting an unknown in an F-22 without proof she can handle real hardware." It didn't matter that her file, the one nobody had actually opened, had a redacted line where her previous unit assignment should have been. It didn't matter that her flight hours, if anyone had checked, didn't add up to someone who'd spent her career doing cargo runs and admin flights, which is what everyone assumed. Nobody checked. Nobody asked. They just decided who she was and moved on. For 3 weeks, Raina sat through ground sims meant for cadets fresh out of the academy. She didn't argue. She didn't request a review. She just showed up, did the sims flawlessly, scores nobody bothered to look at, and went home to the tiny on-base apartment she'd barely unpacked. The other pilots had a name for pilots like her: paperwork placements. People who got assigned to a fighter base but would never actually see a cockpit because someone somewhere had made an administrative mistake. They joked about it openly. Captain Dale Marsh, the base's loudest voice and its most decorated young pilot, made it a running bit. "Hey, farm pilot," he said one morning, loud enough for the whole flight line to hear. "You ever actually flown anything with an engine that doesn't run on diesel?" The hangar laughed. Raina kept walking. What none of them knew, what nobody on that base had bothered to find out, was that 6 years earlier, in a different theater, under a different name, a call sign had gone quiet on every radio channel for 11 straight seconds after a single pilot took out 3 hostile aircraft in a formation so tight and so fast that flight instructors still used the footage in training. That call sign was Black Hawk Crew. Nobody at Hollis Air Base had put those two things together. Yet. The turning point came on a Thursday, during what should have been a routine readiness drill. Hollis was scheduled to run a joint exercise, 6 F-22s in a simulated intercept scenario against an aggressor flight playing the enemy. It was supposed to be low stakes, mostly for training footage and to keep pilots sharp. Colonel Briggs assigned Raina to ground control, monitoring radar feeds, nowhere near a cockpit, obviously. But 40 minutes before the drill began, 2 of the 6 assigned pilots came down with sudden illness, a stomach bug that had been circulating through the barracks. Marsh, scrambling, looked at his roster and realized he was 2 pilots short, with no time to pull in reserves from another base. "What about her?" one of the junior officers asked, half joking, nodding toward Raina at the control desk. "She's rated on the F-22, isn't she? Says so on her file." Marsh laughed. "She's rated on paper. There's a difference." But Briggs, under pressure and out of options, made the call nobody expected. "Put her in the air. Worst case, she flies conservative and we pull her if she can't keep up." Raina didn't argue. She didn't ask for confirmation. She simply nodded, walked to the locker room, and suited up in 11 minutes flat, faster than most veteran pilots on the base. When she walked out to her assigned aircraft, Marsh was waiting by the ladder, arms crossed. "Try not to crash into anyone, farm pilot," he said. "This isn't a cornfield." She looked at him, the first time she'd made real eye contact with anyone on that base in 3 weeks, and said nothing. She climbed the ladder, sealed the canopy, and taxied out. The drill began normally. 6 aircraft split into 2 flights of 3, running standard intercept patterns. For the first 4 minutes, Raina flew exactly as expected, cautious, textbook, nothing remarkable. A few pilots on the radio exchanged smirking comments about the new girl playing it safe. Then, the simulated aggressor flight changed formation without warning, a scenario twist thrown in by the exercise controllers to test adaptability. 3 enemy aircraft broke into an aggressive split-S maneuver designed to flank the defending flight from 2 angles simultaneously. It was a maneuver most pilots at Hollis had only run in simulators, never live. 2 of the veteran pilots hesitated, recalculating. Raina didn't. She rolled her aircraft into a maneuver so clean, so immediate, that for a moment the exercise controllers on the ground thought their radar feed had glitched. She cut inside the flanking angle, intercepted the lead aggressor aircraft in a position that should have taken most pilots twice as long to set up, and called it over the radio in a voice that was calm, flat, and utterly unbothered. "Aggressor lead, you're dead. Reforming on your wing pair now." Silence on the channel. Then she did it again, peeling off to intercept the second aggressor before the first pilot had even finished processing what happened, moving through the maneuver with a precision that looked less like training and more like muscle memory built over hundreds of real combat hours. Marsh, flying lead on the defending flight, keyed his radio, voice tight. "Voss, what call sign is that maneuver from? I've never seen a split intercept run that tight." There was a pause. Then Raina's voice came through, calm as ever. "Black Hawk crew." Nobody in that flight said a word for 11 full seconds, because Black Hawk crew wasn't just a call sign, it was the call sign. The one whispered in flight academies, shown in tactical training footage with the pilot's name blacked out, the one behind the most decorated single-pilot engagement record in the last decade of the program. Every fighter pilot at Hollis Air Base had studied that engagement. None of them knew the pilot behind it had a name, let alone a face. Marsh's voice came back on the radio, quieter now. "That's not possible. Black Hawk crew was retired, reassigned under classification after the Karzan intercept," Raina finished for him. "Yes, I know. I was there." Back on the ground, in the control tower, Colonel Briggs had gone still, staring at the radar screen as if it might explain itself. His adjutant was already pulling up Raina's full personnel file, the real one, the one with the redacted line that suddenly made a great deal more sense once you cross-referenced service dates with a certain classified operation 3 years ago. The drill wrapped up in near silence. When the 6 aircraft landed and taxied back to the hangar, nobody was laughing. Pilots who 10 minutes earlier had been trading jokes about farm pilot stood quietly on the tarmac, watching her canopy rise. Marsh was the first to reach her ladder. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there, The same man who'd mocked her uniform an hour earlier, now looking like he didn't know where to put his hands. "You could have said something," he finally managed. Raina pulled off her helmet, hair damp with sweat, expression unreadable. "Would it have mattered? You already decided who I was the day I got out of that truck." He didn't have an answer for that. Colonel Briggs arrived moments later, moving faster than anyone had seen him move in months. He didn't bother with formalities. "Captain Voss, my office, now, and someone get me her actual file, not whatever's been sitting in that cabinet." As she walked off the flight line, every pilot on that tarmac stood a little straighter. Nobody said, "farm pilot," again. Not that day. Not ever. Later that evening, in Briggs's office, the full picture came out. Raina Voss, under a different operational designation, had flown 22 classified combat sorties in a theater most of the pilots at Hollis had only read about in briefing summaries. The Karzan intercept, the engagement that produced the training footage every single pilot on that base had studied without ever learning the pilot's identity, was hers. After the operation, for reasons involving ongoing classification and a threat assessment on the personnel involved, her file had been quietly scrubbed and she'd been reassigned under standard transfer protocol. No explanation given, no fanfare, just a name in a system with half its history blacked out. She hadn't corrected anyone at Hollis because she'd been ordered not to. She'd simply absorbed 6 weeks of mockery and silence because the alternative was violating a classification order that existed for reasons far bigger than her own pride. "I could have told them," she said quietly to Briggs. "I chose not to. That's not their failure. That's mine, for staying quiet too long." Briggs shook his head. "No, Captain. That's on us. We decided who you were before we ever asked." Word spread fast after that. By the next morning, every pilot on Hollis Air Base knew the story, not through any announcement, but the way these things always spread, one hangar conversation at a time. Marsh, to his credit, sought her out personally the next day, no cameras, no audience, and apologized without excuses. "I judged you before I knew a single real thing about you," he said. "That's on me. If you'll have me, I'd like to actually learn from you, the way I should have from day one." Raina considered him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Show up on time tomorrow. 0600. We'll start with the maneuver that got aggressor lead." It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't a dramatic ceremony. It was just 2 pilots, starting over, the way it should have gone from the beginning. 6 months later, Captain Raina Voss was leading her own flight training unit at Hollis, the same base where, not so long before, pilots had laughed at her boots. Nobody calls her farm pilot anymore. Now, when new transfers arrive and someone mentions the quiet instructor with the Nebraska accent, the story that gets told isn't about a crop duster. It's about the day every F-22 on that runway went silent. If this story hit you the way it hit us to write it, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button right now, because we've got a new story just like this one going up tomorrow, and you will not want to miss it. And before you go, I want to know what you think. If you were Colonel Briggs and you found out someone on your base had been quietly hiding a record like hers for 6 weeks while your team mocked her every single day, would you have handled it differently? Or do you think Raina was right to stay silent until the moment proved itself? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'll be replying to my favorites. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.